Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in a few moments. We're just waiting for people to join. Or good afternoon, I should say. We're past 12 now. Quick time for you to get yourself your water or coffee or tea or whatever you're going to be sipping on while we have a conversation this afternoon. We'll just give it probably about a minute more for people to join in. I see people are joining on now. And then we'll get started. I'm glad you've all decided to come today. I don't know on this platform if I can see you, but I'm sure you can see me. I'm hoping. And you do have a space to ask questions in the Q&A. Not sure if chat just works for everyone. Just let me pick the first person on here. See if I can send a chat. I guess I can't. Roy, can the participants use actions in this platform? So if participants, sometimes on the bottom of these Zoom sessions, there is actions on the bottom besides raise hand, thumbs up. Okay, now we can't see the participants though, is that correct, Roy? Okay, well, we'll have to do this a little bit different way. Well, I think we'll get started. It's 12:04. And so my name is Laureen Blu Waters, and I will do an opening, land acknowledgement, and then we'll get right into some teachings. So, Tanseeski Nikamoon na Tisina Kasun, Maingendo Dem Ahtahkakoop Saskatchewan, Gordon's Reserve, Nadunjaba, Ayakwe, Mayingen. So what I've said here is my name is Earth Song. My family comes from Ahtahkakoop, Saskatchewan, Gordon's Reserve, and I am from the Wolf Clan, and I am a Yakwe, which is the Cree word for neither man nor woman. So this afternoon, we want to give thanks to the Creator for allowing us to be here today and to join into learning some Two-Spirit teachings and understandings. We give thanks to all those who came here before us and have helped us to get to where we are today. We give thanks to the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, the Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and all those nations that call this their home today, having been welcomed here to work and to live in these territories that we now walk upon. We give thanks to our Mother the Earth for providing for us everything that we need, all of creation that provides for us each and every day. I'm sure you may have noticed that the trees are still doing their jobs. They've started their budding to get ready to provide us with some leaves so that we can have some shelter when the summer comes from the hot rays of the sun, as well as those waters have melted and are now nourishing those plants, those four-leggeds, those crawlers, those swimmers, those flyers, from their states in which they were resting over the winter time. So we give thanks for that they are now up and active and being able to do their part with creation. I give thanks for each and every one of you for being here. And I ask that today the Creator and those ancestors help me to say the words that need to be said so I can share with you the teachings in which I've been graciously granted from many teachers along my journey, as well as my family and my friends and my community. So we say for that, we say Chimigwich, hi hi. And I'll just get started with saying my preferred name is Blue. My pronouns are they and them. And I live in the city of Toronto. And the city of Toronto Indigenous community was the one that named me about 15 years ago and given me the title of elder in this community. It was something that I ran from for a little bit because it is a very hard identity to walk and live each and every day, because we always have to be mindful that we try to speak in the best way possible, to be impartial, to not be judgmental, to be able to remember and carry those knowledges forward for the next generation so that they become those knowledge keepers and elders. And so I had felt that I was way too young. I'm currently 62. I was younger then, so 15 years ago. And I didn't think I was ready. But through the gracious help and support of Pauline Shirt, whom I sat with many, many times, and she took me under her wing and brought me into the elders group at one point at the Native Canadian Center, and told all the elders there that this one will be an elder very soon. But again, I was like, no, not me, not me, because I wasn't sure I was quite ready for that responsibility. And so each and every day I give thanks that the community looks towards me and asks for my input, my teachings, my guidance, so that I can share the knowledges amongst each and every person who resides here, as well as across Turtle Island. I'm the elder on campus for Seneca College, as well as the Indigenous Community Engagement Coordinator. I do lots of work for Two-Spirit people of the First Nation. I just retired from the board of Two Spirits in Motion after serving my 3-year term, and made space for another person to come on board, because that's what we need to do, always make space for someone else so they can bring new understandings and new ideas into different boards and corporations and organizations so that we don't become stagnant. I traveled with the National Inquiry for 2.5 years into the inquiry for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirited people. I was the traditional grandmother for Commissioner Brian Eyolfson, and so I was doing that work right across Canada, and to make sure that the 2S LGBTQIANB+ community had their voice recognized, because we know with gender diversity, sometimes our world is not ready to look outside of that gender binary in which we have all grown up with. That binary that was created without input from many nations on identity, and therefore only recognized male and female. And we're still trying to unpack that nowadays and realize that all of us have the right, all of us have the understanding that we should really be able to be who we are and not be defined within any binary unless we so choose it, as well as not being forced to not be able to be who we are. We see through our communities that the lack of understanding, the phobias that exist, whether it be biphobia, transphobia, phobias against our racism against Indigenous people, that these are all harmful mechanisms that are still in place across Turtle Island. And they really harm our communities. Our communities feel as if they don't belong. Spaces are not made accessible to gender diverse people because our communities still think within that binary perspective. I'm very grateful for the youth of today who are approaching and doing that work as was forecasted for us in the 8th Fire Prophecies, in which a time was spoken, and I won't go through each one, but when we get to the 6th prophecy, it was told to us that the elders would go to sleep because no one would be looking for them. that there would come a time when our sacred scrolls and items, parts of our bundle would be put away because they would be violated. We were told about our children would be taken away and not returned back to some of their communities. And we know that those are times that have happened with our residential schools, our 60 scoops, the continuation of child welfare system, birth alerts that remove children from their families. As well as when we look through history, we see that there were Canadian laws that forbid Indigenous people to gather in spaces. Indigenous people were forced to be confined on reserves and only be allowed to leave from the past system. And so that is a true representation of what that sixth fire represented. And then it spoke of the seventh fire, which is the time we're in now. It speaks of that time when our youth will go and wake up the elders and go looking for direction, that our sacred items and scrolls and bundles would come back into the open, that our people would rise up and become vocal and be able to participate in spaces where they were not allowed in the past. And so that is happening right now, and our youth are really taking charge of that. And that gives me a good feeling because as I said, I'm 62, so I've seen quite a few events in my life where gender diverse people, two-spirit people have been harmed and violated. And so I'm very hopeful that within the next 2 generations, hopefully we won't have to fight so hard for our rights to be treated as equal human beings, to be given the same opportunities to create equity, diversity, and inclusion amongst us than the rest of the population that lives here and works in Turtle Island. I'm going to start off with giving you a scenario, and which is part of the two-spirit teaching identity. So when each of us was born, most likely all of us that are on this call, what we would have seen happen was our life giver would have either been in a hospital or a birth center or at home. And during that birth process, only our immediate family is usually present, especially if it's in a hospital surrounding that we can bring one person into the birthing room with us. And so if we're going to review how births were done, I guess you would call it post-colonial, our life giver goes into a hospital and she is seen, or they are seen, depending on their identity, and the nurses would be present and they would coach the life giver to bring forth that new life. And when that life happens, immediately that child, that beautiful gift from Creator, would be given a gender based upon a physical anatomy. And so to be very specific, if a child was born with a penis, they would be declared to be masculine or male. If a child was born with a vagina, they would be determined to be female or feminine. And so from that point forward, our parents, our families would work again within that binary, which does not make space for anyone who may identify outside of that female and male identity, such as non-binary people, two-spirited people, trans people, bi people, and then again our questioning people, our queer people, our intersex people that have different ways of seeing ourselves within the world without being boxed and categorized in one gender. And so they would have started living their life in that way. And as they grew up, they would have the ability to see themselves how they really should be. And we know that a lot of our youth are in those stages right now, and they're looking at themselves in mirrors and being identified by a gender binary, not seeing themselves truly reflected, not seeing themselves truly accepted and included, because they don't fit into just male or female. And we see that with a lot of our youth who end up committing suicide because they're not accepted for who they see themselves as, but are determined by other people who they should be and who they are. And so when we break down this gender binary and we open that to many different gender identities, we create a safer space. We create a space where people can see themselves and they can represent themselves in the ways that they see fit, not how certain standards have been in existence since the beginning of colonization, which is more than 500 years ago. And now I'm going to take you to a scenario of what would have happened pre-contact from an Indigenous community. So when our young ones are born in an Indigenous community, usually the whole community would be preparing for this celebration of this beautiful gift which would come to our community in the form of a human being. And so community would be waiting. And generally the oldest matriarch, or the one who helps bring life forward, which had many names. Today we call them birth workers, or we call them doulas, we call them life givers, helpers. They would have been present. And so they would have helped that life giver at the time when life would begin for that little human being on the outside of their safe world in which they've been growing for 9 months, and hearing everything that was going around them. So the sounds, listening to the heartbeat of their life giver, being kept in a beautiful temperature in which they were neither hot nor cold, a safe space that they could continue growing so that they could make those connections, not only with their life giver, but also with their community as they became that human being on the outside of that life-giving ability from that life giver. And so when it was time, community would be notified, and they would generally come and sit outside the lodge of the person who was the life giver. And we know that there's many different types of lodges. It could have been a wigwam, could have been a teepee, could have been a longhouse, could have been a lean-to, it could have been in a cabin, right? Some type of a housing where the family was residing at. And so when that beautiful water broke, creating that pathway for that new gift to come to us, that matriarch or that life giver helper would have been there ready to receive that new life. And as that child came through that water path, the life giver would have, the life giver helper would have picked them up, and they would have spoke to them. And so I am from a Cree language, and so in the Cree language, they would have been greeted with Tansei, Awina Kakina. Hello, who are you? By that matriarch or that life giver helper. And we believe through Indigenous knowledges that newly infant would have spoke to that person. Their spirit would have spoke to the spirit of the helper. And in my case, if we're talking, and I'll use my name, I would have said, Tansei Istchii Nikamoon, a Yahweh. I would have said, hello, I'm Earth Song. I'm neither man nor woman. And at that point, that helper would have started to wrap me up in that cloth to keep me warm, because now I was outside that space in which the temperature stayed the same. And I could have been, for me, I was born on December 30th, so it was very cold at that time. So they would have wrapped me in some type of a cloth. And we would think that they would have given me immediately to my family, my life giver at this point, as they do in a hospital situation today, or in a birthing center as they do today. But instead, that matriarch would have gone outside that lodge and introduced me to community who had been waiting. And they would have told them the same thing as I told them. This is Istchii Nikamoon, a Yahweh. This is Earth Song. They are neither man nor woman. And at that point, the community would greet me. And then they would say, the matriarch would say, okay, now we can go and prepare for this child. And so they would go back to their lodges. And then they would turn me around and bring me back into that space of life. And they would introduce me to my parent, my life giver. And in the same way, they would have said, this is Earth Song. They are neither man nor woman. And so my family would already know who I am without having to look at genitalia to determine who I am. And I would have been welcomed into community because there were many people in community that were not fitting within those gender binaries that we know today. And so from that part of my journey, community would have returned, and they would have brought me items to help me along my journey. And just as we do today in what we would call baby showers, I guess, they would have brought me little blankets, and they probably would have brought me, I would say my smudge bowl, my medicines, and different items for me to be able to carry along my journey. And in that, community would have started from a Cree perspective. We don't walk on the earth for the very first year. We're always held and carried, except within our own lodge. And then we can touch the ground because it is a time when we're still connected to that spirit world. And so we can hear and see things from that spiritual perspective that we did as we were forming and becoming a human being. And so when I would be over a year old, community would also come and sit with me, and they would speak with me, and they would help me to be able to do anything that was needed in a community. And when it came a time when I was ready to be able to go out and learn about harvesting, such as picking berries or picking plant medicines or going hunting, they would have taken me to do all those roles and responsibilities in a community. Because as a two-spirit person, I would be able to walk with both that masculine perspective and that feminine perspective. And so they would take me out to see where my gifts lied. So what were my gifts? Because we know if someone can hunt, they are a hunter. We don't call them a man hunter or a woman hunter. We call them a hunter. And so they would have helped me to see if I was going to be a hunter as I got older and develop that responsibility and skill. And then they would have taken me gathering and medicine picking and taught me how to plant for sustainability for life, such as our corn and our squash and our beans and all those plants that we bring back into the ground because they do not reproduce themselves every year. And so with that, I would learn many skills in a community so that I could carry that responsibility of a two-spirit person as a person that has that ability to help out in areas that have become gendered. And I would do that work. And there are stories that have been printed and have been told orally throughout time where we spoke about our communities traveling, not using up everything in one space, because some nations were migratory, such as the prairie provinces. They would move from space to space to harvest what was needed to sustain a community without using all the supplies in one area. So they would leave for those coming behind them. And they would also follow the migratory patterns of the animals. So they would go to different spaces to hunt. And when we passed through another community's territory, we would approach them. And of course, as we do today, we would have given them a gift, probably something from the previous year's harvested that we did, or it could be something that we created with our hands, just to ask permission to pass through their territory, to continue along our journey so that we could find a space to sustain ourselves for a period of time. And when that happened, our communities, we would look for the two-spirited people because they were thought as being sacred people, pre-contact, because they had the abilities to see things with more than one perspective. It is said that they walk with one foot on the earth, our mother the earth, and one foot still in that sky world, connected to the creator, being able to do responsibilities in community that would be hard for other people or were not their gifts. And if there were no two-spirit people present along our journey in another community, we wouldn't stay, we would pass through right away, because we know as we journey, sometimes there's community members that need doctors, and a lot of two-spirit people would have been trained in medicines, so they could help out in the way of doctoring and taking care of physical health. A lot of Two-Spirit people would have been trained as what we now call therapists, and they would have known how to take care of our emotional states, our mental wellness. And then there were people that would have been trained in fitness like we have today. Our Two-Spirit people would have had to be very active to be able to perform many responsibilities in a community. And then again, also spiritually, because we are connected to that sky world still. And so when there was no Two-Spirit peoples in a community, we would keep going until we found a community that there was, so those that we were traveling with could receive whatever was needed for themselves. And in this identity as Two-Spirited, it was created by Dr. Mira Laramie in 1990. So that's quite a few years ago. And I've had the privilege of sitting with Dr. Mira Laramie, just a moment, at Two Spirits in Motion board meetings. And, you know, she has told her story that, you know, it occurred at a gathering, an international gay gathering. And our Two-Spirit people were looking for an identity to be included with our spirituality, not just with our sexual identities. And so Dr. Mira Laramie went into sweat to try and find a name so that we could not only embrace our emotion, our physical, and our intellectual, but also our spirituality, because we do have responsibilities to community. It's not just a sexual identity. It's not just a gender identity. There are responsibilities that we walk with. And of course, we have the choice of taking those responsibilities or not, because it is a hard journey to walk. And so the word Two-Spirited came to Dr. Mira Laramie. And that word is meant to be used only, and I express only, by Indigenous people, because it came through ceremony. And so it was specifically prayed for, tobacco was offered, and that name came to represent an Indigenous person who did not identify within that gender binary. And we know that each of us can come up with a terminology ourselves that represents who we are, which is why our rainbow acronym, we call it, has gotten longer and longer, and it continues to grow because people are finding the words finally to express how they see themselves. Because as an Indigenous person, I do not have the right to judge anybody. I do not have the right to tell anybody who they should be. That is not our responsibility in life. Our responsibility is to be a good human being and to help those where and when we can along our journey, to be able to share our experiences when asked for, and to listen when someone needs a listening ear to be heard. And so when we meet someone, as the Cree language says, Awina Kakina, who are you? That allows people to let us know who they are and how they identify, without us forming any judgment through learned understandings, which is what a lot of us walk with today. When we see someone, we automatically judge them by how they look. We know that 500 years ago, a lot of the time our people lived outside and they were very active outside, which is not the lifestyle that many of us live today. And so our people were a lot different shades than what we are today. And so, you know, there's not just Indigenous people who have that darker skinned look, or some people call it a leathery look as you get older, because our wisdom wrinkles tend to come through. And we have blonde hair, blue-eyed, status Indigenous people. We have blonde hair, green-eyed. We have dark hair, green-eyed, dark hair, blue-eyed, lighter skinned, medium colored skin, darker skin. And so our eyes can be very deceptive by just seeing from the understandings that we have grown up with, and which really is not respectful. So when we look at our 7 grandfather teachings about truth, honesty, humility, wisdom, bravery, love, and respect. If we're judging people, we're not being respectful. If we're making people fit into spaces in a gender binary where they don't feel they belong, we are not allowing them to be honest with who they are, to be able to speak with truth about who they are, and we're not following that teaching of humility, to ask questions because we don't know everything. If we're not exposed to something, sometimes it's very hard for us to understand. And so a lot of people in Indigenous communities who are forced to be within Indian residential schools, 60 school children aid systems, who are put into non-Indigenous families, they don't know understandings that are Indigenous focused because they didn't grow up with them. And so when we think of humility, we have to remember that it is okay to say, I don't know, can you teach me? Or that is not what I know, can you tell me what you know? And so that teaching of humility can be applied when we meet people not knowing who they are. And then that teaching of love, that we're supposed to treat each other in a way with love, that we're not meant to be harmful to each other. We're not meant to be disrespectful or shaming because somebody is different from how we see ourselves. And then that gift of wisdom, to go looking for that information, to go seeking, because we have a beautiful thing right now called Grandma Google, which I'm sure a lot of you use quite often for looking for answers for questions. And so if we're not sure about different gender identities, we can look in Grandma Google and we can find out different interpretations of gender identities. And so with that, we can open up our minds and expand our mind. And, you know, to be brave, a lot of our people who are identify as outside that gender binary, it's very hard to say who you are when you've always been rejected for who you are. I know that living in Toronto, we have a lot of two-spirited people who are not welcomed in ceremonies because community does not know about two-spirited people, or they're conflicted because they may have grown up with Christianity teachings that were non-acceptance of those beyond the gender binary. And so they still struggle with that, to be open to different identities nowadays. And, you know, to separate someone. So if someone is born as a female and transitions to male, to be able to accept them, that they are truly a male. That is who they are. That is who they've always been. However, their body anatomy didn't reflect that. And we know that 500 years ago, even 50 years ago, we didn't have the ability to make our bodies match our identities and who we've seen ourselves. And today we have that ability so that we don't have to feel uncomfortable with how our bodies are perceived as opposed to how we see ourselves. When we have a person who transitions from male to female, we know that they should be welcomed in our ceremonies as a female presenting person because they are female, right? That is who they are. We never judge anybody by clothing, nor should anybody be forced to be within clothing that defines a binary. We go into ceremony, we go into teaching spaces so we can learn, so we can pick up understandings and carry teachings forward for the next generations, because it is our responsibility to take care of the 7 generations behind us and the 7 generations in front of us. And so learning those understandings from the previous 7 generations is all of our responsibilities. Carrying this way of being respectful and kind and treating people with love is our responsibility for the next 7 generations. We see how it has harmed our communities. And so we really need to unpack that binary specific understanding and allow our community people to come into ceremonies as they are, not as who we think they should be and how we think they should be. And that might be hard for some people because we know we've all experienced traumas. Part of those traumas are when we have a person who has transitioned from female to male, and a person has experienced violence from a male person. And so they may not want male bodies present or male identities present. And the same with the reverse, with female bodies. But when we go to ceremony, when we talk about spirituality, we don't go in there with anything other than to be a good human being. We don't go in there looking to see who we can violate. We don't go in there looking to see who we can date, who we can form relationships with that would be other than a friendship relationship. And so we have to remember that when we attend spaces, that we cannot exclude people based upon what we see with our eyes, because that is not being respectful to anyone. And so as you see the two difference between post-colonial births and pre-colonial births, I would have wanted to be born in a pre-colonial time where I would have been welcomed by all my community members. I would have been given the opportunity to see where my gifts lie, because each and every one of us is born with gifts that we carry that will help our communities to be well and to be able to take care of ourselves and to become self-reliant so that we don't have to look for external ways of taking care of ourselves, whether it be emotionally, physically, intellectually, or spiritually. We don't live in those times anymore. Our communities are very harsh because we have experienced a lot of violence as First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people from all the phobias that have existed since colonization started, and we were forced to be within that gender binary. One of the first steps that we can take to break down those gender binaries is to add pronouns to our being. So in our emails, when we attend events and we have to have those little square stickers that we wear with our names on it, adding a pronoun might not seem important to some people, but it is important to a gender diverse person when they can see the words they or them on a pronoun sheet or a pronoun badge or some type of identification, because it lets them know that that person is open and understands that there is more than just male and female identities. For those that are cisgender, it is okay to have your own pronouns as she and her or he and him, but it's opening up those doors to make space for gender diverse people so that they can add their pronouns onto their below their names and know that others that might be looking to find a safe space to go and have a conversation will reach out to those people because they see that they themselves do not work within that binary confinement. So that's a very first important step that we all can take. I'm sure a lot of us, especially if we're on here today on a Zoom platform, which is a media platform, we have emails, right? We use emails. We're in this technology phase. And so to simply add that in the signature on your emails would be something that would make a difference for someone looking for support from someone who understands gender diversity. And also at our workspaces. I work for a college and I have lots of students who come in and they see the pride flag in our office and they see the safe space sticker. And so they feel more welcomed. They know that they can come in for who they are and not have to be someone whom they're not by being forced to fit within somebody else's, I guess, definition of who they are. Does that make sense to you all of there? I'm going to leave the opportunity now for you to put anything in the email. I see there is one comment in there. Let me see if I can. My email address is Laureen LA. I'll put it in the chat. Can you people see the chat or no? Not sure. Let's see. Let's see if I can type it now. I can type it in here. Sorry about that. It should be in the Q&A for you now, so that you can see my email address in there. That is my personal email address. And I'm going to open it up for you if you have any questions that you might want to comment on, because we have covered quite a bit of information, I feel, and understandings. You may have a question that you've been wanting to ask, or something you may need expansion on, that maybe I can define it a little bit differently. And or maybe let me ask this, and you can put this in the Q&A. Yes, if you say for everyone, let me see. So can you all see in the chat for everyone? You can also put in the chat, I guess, a question or a comment. I'm hoping I read that correctly. I'm going to ask, would you have preferred to be born pre-contact or post-contact as a way of being greeted as a new gift to your community? I'll give you a second to type that in the Q&A, which should be down at the bottom of your toolbar. Let me see, open this Q&A and see if any of you've typed anything. No one has typed to me yet. Nobody has any questions, any comments? You have me for this time, for still another, until 1 o'clock. And so we still have time that we can discuss anything to do with two-spirited people. Maybe you might have a family member who is two-spirited. Has any of this conversation that I've had with you today helped you to be able to maybe see someone in a different way than what you had before? Are there any unique considerations when it comes to providing healthcare to two-spirit during pregnancy, birthing, and our postpartum period? Absolutely. As I described to you, to have someone there that if you are a Indigenous person that is spiritual, to welcome that child, to be able to listen for their name and their clan if the life giver doesn't know that information yet, because a lot of our community has not even connected with their clan systems. And then also, in that birthing process, to really speak to that child as it is coming through that birth canal with that beautiful gift of water, which is life, and to welcome that new child into the community. So that would be something that we could do. And when it comes to postpartum, when we provide supports to a new life giver, that is so important, that we do follow-ups with our life givers to see if they need anything. I know for myself, I have 3 children, and now I have another 2. I'm getting married again. So now I will have 5 children that I consider all my own. I know in my understandings, we don't have half of anything. So I don't have stepchildren. I have 2 new children added into my family, and my previous 3 children accept them as their siblings, and they refer to them as their siblings. And so, when a new parent gives life, we don't know everything. Babies don't come with manuals. Would be nice if they did, but they don't. And so, to be able to spend time with that new life giver, to make sure that they are receiving enough rest time, because if we don't rest, our minds cannot compute and retain everything, because we need that rest for our minds to be able to filter information that we experience that day into spaces where we're either going to keep that information or let it go. So we need to make sure we have our rest. Also, providing help in the way of aunties to that new life giver. Those people who have already had children, who will know certain things to look for as they've already raised children on their own, and certain comforting methods, certain ways in which to carry a child. I had to carry one of mine with my hand on their chin and their body cradled within my arm along their belly because they were a very gassy child. And so I would rock them in that way, and that would help them with the trapped gas that they carried. And yet the other one I could carry as we carry children across my chest over my shoulder. So, when it comes to postpartum, parents can become very depressed. Life givers can become depressed because it's a lot of work, and it can become overwhelming. And our hormones are fluctuating during that time because we're going to return to pre-pregnant hormone levels. And so to have someone that they can confide in, look towards for help, supports, even community around them. A new mom hardly has time to do dishes or make dinners. So, from an Indigenous perspective, when we know someone who is going to give life, we cook some prepared meals and then bring them to them, even if they're frozen. Those type of things really help out a new life giver. So I hope that answers your question. And in healthcare, to really, that was one of the recommendations in the calls to action for the National Inquiry, that our healthcare really learn true Indigenous understandings and stop treating our community members with indigophobia. I don't know if that's a word, but maybe I'll make it a word, indigophobia, that Indigenous people are not equal to every other person who walks amongst us. We're still thought of as not being equivalent. And so in healthcare, sometimes we get ignored. In healthcare, sometimes we don't have the opportunity to have people come in to help us use our secret medicines, such as smudging or bringing in cedar tea for someone to have after they've delivered a child. So, we really need to still work on the healthcare system where there are spaces and places where we can utilize as Indigenous, First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people for types of cultural ways in healthcare institutions. So that is something that we can work on together. So I hope that answers your question. And does anybody else have a question? We still have time. And I'm more than willing to share what I know with you. I don't know everything. I will be one of the first to say that. Sometimes I can't remember what I'm even saying because I did contact COVID, and so I have long COVID. So sometimes my short-term memory recall isn't as quick as what it once was. And some of you may experience that the same thing as me, because it's not only myself that's finding these things. I have on here a message. How do we continue our learning about two-spiritness? Well, there's the Two-Spirit People of the First Nation organization in Toronto. There's also Two Spirits in Motion, which is a national organization now across Canada. And you can go to either of their websites and you can join them as an ally, bearing in mind that certain events are, I guess you would call it, separated to First Nation people, so that they have access to like things that would be crafts or certain programming. But you can go there and learn. They do have a two-spirit mentor there that they could answer questions for you, as well as Two Spirits in Motion. Those would be two spaces that I can recommend to you. There is also, as I said, Google. Google can help you out. Dr. Albert McLeod, who's in Two-Spirit community in Manitoba. There's also a new one just opened up in Saskatchewan, a Two-Spirit Society. And so, right now, Two Spirits is really expanding because there always has been a need for spaces and places to go to that were safe and inclusive, and being able to teach those that are not two-spirited so that they can relate to the two-spirit people. and receive some information that, all two-spirited people are really looking for is to be included, not just invited to spaces, but included. Because we know as a human being, sometimes what we don't know, we fear, or we're a little bit hesitant. And so if we learn about each other from a two-spirit perspective, we will find that there's nothing to fear and that we are just another human being who doesn't fit within that gender binary and wants to be included in culture, in ceremony, in spaces, as they are, not as who people want them to be. And so to treat that person like a beautiful gift that they are, so that you can learn in other spaces, including the internet. There are lots of books. I would suggest that you read this book, Johnny Appleseed, by Joshua Whitehead. I don't know if it's the right way on your camera, but when I look at it here, it's the wrong way. This is a beautiful book that talks about a two-spirit journey of an individual and some of the experiences that they go through and some of the trauma they experienced. So that is a beautiful, beautiful book. It's not for younger children. It is very descriptive. The person in this book, does talk about sex work, how they had to do sex work to survive, and some of the language may not be appropriate. Sorry about that. Some of the language may not be appropriate for younger readers, but it is a very good book. I know several universities are using it and colleges as part of their curriculum. So that would be a place where you can look towards. If you ever get a chance to see Wawate Forbisters play a gokwe, I'm not sure where it's being performed, if it's being performed right now. That is a play that speaks to the Anishinaabe word, a gokwe, which it translates literally into like a two-spirit person. There are many words in the original languages that are out there that are being revived right now. For the Anishinaabe language, some people use the term Nishmanadok, which originally means two-spirit. It translates those two words into two-spirit. In Mi'kma'ki, Tapujigamaji is the word literally translated into two spirits. In the Cree language, I use the old word Ayakwe, which means neither man nor woman. And so we did have language for those who were gender diverse throughout history. It's just that we stopped using them. Well, we were forced to not use them. That's more of the reality of it. We were forced to not be able to speak our language. And so some of those words haven't been spoken for a long time, and now they're being revived. So, just contact Two-Spirit people of the First Nations, Two-Spirits in Motion. They can help you out in learning more about Two-Spirit people and who we are as people and the gifts that we carry so that we can contribute to our communities that we live and work within to create healthier communities. We only got about 5 minutes left, and I'm more than willing to answer any more questions. There is a question in there, I just see it now. How can birthing centers and colonial healthcare systems honor these understandings, operational and practical? Well, by us as Indigenous people or allies, asking for these systems to be put in place. When we go to hospitals, by asking what resources are there for First Nation, Inuit, or Métis people. One of the processes that happen usually with an Indigenous birth is that afterbirth is taken care of, and that afterbirth can be taken with the life giver if it happens in a health center. And some nations take that afterbirth and they plant it in the ground. Some put a tree on top of it, and that links that child to that homeland, to that part of the earth. And so those are processes which Indigenous people should be able to access. To also have doulas come in to the hospital to take care of that new life giver, to be present at the births and not just a birthing partner. And then as well, ask them who gives them their teachings. Where do they get their Indigenous understandings from? We know that there was a person at Michael Guerin, and that person is no longer there, who did sweat lodges there. And so Michael Guerin is redoing their Indigenous, I guess you would call it Indigenous ways, learning Indigenous ways and being able to provide services for Indigenous people. So I know they are revising that. And I know that because I sit on Thunder Women's Healing Lodge Society Board, and Thunder Women Healing Lodge has been asked to help out with that work to make sure that our Indigenous community members receive services that they should be having. Yes, somebody has asked to clarify and pardon my ignorance. A two-spirit person identified is the identity is determined at birth. Good example, a person who was not deemed two-spirit at birth question this decision later in life and feel in their heart that they are in fact two-spirit. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because sometimes we don't have those people there that can hear that gift of that child's spirit speaking to us. And so, if we practice things like raising children gender neutral, by not making children fit in stereotyping, as in, someone that we think is a female, they can't play with trucks. Why not? Our people who live on farms, our women who live on farms drive trucks. Little people that would be considered masculine. Why can't they play with dolls? That's part of nurturing. That's part of taking care of. Fathers have to help out taking care of their children. So trying to raise our children gender neutral, where we don't fit them into only boxes, and have conversations with them. There's many books out there to have conversations about gender diversity with children. You can check out Good Minds. You can check out Indigo. You can also find those. I think I've answered your questions on here. So I do have to do a closing because I did call in and give thanks to the Creator for being here today. But I hope I've been able to broaden your understanding. If you do have any questions, feel free to give me an email and I'll answer them for you, should I be able to. But at this point, I'd like to say Chi-miigwech to the Creator, hi Creator, for being here with us for today, for helping me as the presenter recall the teachings that needed to be said today, and for helping the participants to have their minds open to hearing information that they may not have heard before. Chi-miigwech to those ancestors that watched over us today and will continue to watch over us today as we continue along our journey today after this event. And thank you to University of Toronto for inviting me here to share these words with you. And I ask that as you walk on your journey today, that the Creator and the ancestors walk with you and help you along your journey and listen to your prayers of what you may need, and to just be a good human being. That's all we can really ask for. So thank you very much. Hopefully, if you have any more, let me know, and I'm more than happy to come back and help you out.
Miigwech Blue for that wonderful presentation. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our April webinar for the Ontario NEIHR Series 2023. If you check our Ontario NEIHR website, which the link is in the chat, you can see all of our previous webinars. So once again, miigwech and miigwech to Blue.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.